the promise to bring back some decency and standards in politics again after what we've seen these last few years. I think that does inspire and give hope that things can be better after the chaos that we've seen these last 13 years under the Conservatives.
So, Rachel, it is great to have you speak to us on Times Radio. Now, before we start going through the detail of the autumn statement, just tell us, how do you find these events, these big fiscal moments in the House? All eyes are going to be upon you. Do you look forward to them? Do you get nervous about them?
So the Shadow Chancellor responds to fiscal events apart from when it's a budget, and then it's the Leader of the Opposition that responds to a budget. But I don't know if you remember, but 2 years ago, not long after I'd become Shadow Chancellor, it was the budget, and it was an autumn budget. And Keir was due to respond, but 45 minutes before, do you remember, he did a test for COVID and he tested positive 45 minutes before the budget. And I had to respond. It was the first time I'd ever responded to a fiscal event before because I hadn't been appointed that long before. So I sort of think if I could do it in 45 minutes, I could do it any time. But that was very much in the deep end.
I remember that.
We were in this room, which is the leader's boardroom, and Keir, had been sort of ushered out, and I was ushered in to start practicing. We didn't have a chance to print a new version. So it was Keir's version with his underlinings, his notes in the margin. But it was, in the end, my speech to deliver. And I had just had time to send a text message to my husband saying, I am responding to the budget. And I didn't see a reply because by that time I was up there.
You were literally in the chamber. I do remember, Keir got COVID a lot, didn't he?
Well, he was very, I think it's because Keir was really careful and he didn't want to give it to anyone else, so he tested every day. Also, his wife works at a hospital, so she had to test every day.
Yeah.
So probably sometimes it was picked up, whereas other people wouldn't. But that was my first experience of responding to a fiscal event, and I didn't have much notice. This time, obviously, you have the, whatever it is, 6-10 weeks notice that the Chancellor has to give to the Office of Budget Responsibility.
Do you have any sort of pre-match rituals? We often hear about what, people have for breakfast or whether they go for a run in the morning. What's your kind of pre-fiscal event ritual?
Well, this time I went to the House of Commons hairdressers to make sure I looked smart for the occasion. And then I'm with my team in the office, and we have, which actually works very well. And when I was Shadow Chief Secretary, when Ed Balls was Shadow Chancellor, we didn't have this, but we now have the benefit of WhatsApp, and we use that to keep in touch with the team whilst we're in the chamber. So I have the speech obviously printed out. Remember, I don't know anything about I have as much knowledge as anybody else of what's in the speech. We don't know.
To be fair, this time
it was quite well briefed. It was quite well briefed. So we've got various pages that in the end you don't use. You've got, inheritance tax, if they do it, if they don't do it, if they say they're going to come back to it. And then we use this WhatsApp group to delete, line 162 to 166 because that's no longer relevant because he hasn't said that. Also, we don't know the numbers that he's going to read out. He has to read out the numbers from the Office of Budget Responsibility on growth and borrowing, and so we're quickly adding those into the document. So it's quite a stressful
it's all
thing
being
to
done
respond to in real time. Absolutely.
And we're obsessed about food on Times Radio. What's your breakfast snack or treat on sort of these big days?
I always have Marmite on toast for breakfast. So that's what I had.
Love it, Rachel. Marmite,
very Marmite. Exactly.
Well, that may well end up being a very, very apt. Right, let's get into the autumn statement. So what's interesting about it is that it felt very much like a doorstep sort of autumn statement. Many people are speculating that this is sort of now very much pitch rolling towards a general election. There's quite a clear message from the Conservatives. They are saying, look, we are the party that's cutting taxes and we're going to be tough on welfare. What's your reaction to sort of that framing of it?
Well, it doesn't stack up, would be my reaction to it, because the Office of Budget Responsibility has shown that the tax burden will go up for each of the next 5 years and is already at a 70-year high. So the chancellor, this government, are raising taxes, not lowering them. And as I said in the statement, the increases to personal taxation on working people already in train are equivalent to a 10p increase in national insurance, and the chancellor cut national insurance by 2p. So you're giving with one hand, but actually you're taking much more with the other. And even despite what the chancellor announced this week, the amount that we are all paying in taxes will be rising over the next 5 years.
So you've got a very sort of tough critique of the Tory government's record on the economy. But actually, you did agree with quite a lot of it. You've said that you agree with the cuts to national insurance. You've broadly said you're happy with them keeping the triple lock. You're happy with the 100% expensing. You've said yourself that you will want to do some welfare reforms. It does feel like this is actually an autumn statement that you agreed with, despite your overall critique. There's a lot of agreement.
There would have been things, if it had have been my autumn statement yesterday, the day before yesterday, that I would have done that the Chancellor didn't do. So, for example, I know that our National Health Service needs an injection of cash. It's on its knees. We've got a waiting list of 7.8 million now. In fact, it's 500,000 higher than when the Prime Minister made one of his 5 pledges. That was the last set of 5 pledges, not the current set of 5 pledges, where he said he was going to reduce NHS waiting lists. So we have got a fully costed and a fully funded plan to create 2 million additional appointments a year in our National Health Service, as well as the additional dentist appointments and the free breakfast clubs in primary schools. So the Chancellor said almost nothing about the NHS in his autumn statement yesterday. Now, given that the NHS is in desperate need of funding as well as reform, I think that was a huge mistake. But it was a mistake for another reason as well, and that is because a healthy NHS is essential for a healthy economy. Because if you've got all these people, millions, waiting for operations and scans and appointments, for many of those people, their lives are on hold and they're not able to work because they are sick. And if we can get that backlog down, get through people through the system quicker, then we've got a better chance of increasing the number of people available for work. And we're now the only G7 major economy whose employment rate is lower than it was before the pandemic. And that's because we have a unique challenge with our health service after 13 years of Conservative government.
So obviously you're trying to make a link between the health of the economy and the NHS, and that's something that many people will welcome. But many people want you to commit now to giving more money to the NHS. Wes Streeting has come under some criticism from doctors and other groups saying that, you're not committing to huge amounts of money. You're talking a lot about reform. Yes, you've made some announcements about trying to get more appointments in the system, which will require overtime from a lot of already burnt out staff. Paul Johnson from the IFS says, look, that is good, but it's a real drop in the ocean compared to what the NHS need. What do you say to those people? You make a case about the NHS, but a lot of my listeners will be like, Rachel Reeves, tell us what money you're going to put into the NHS.
So we have committed to getting rid of the Nondom tax status and replacing it with a fairer system for people who are genuinely in the UK for short periods of time.
That is just a small amount of money.
It raises £2 billion every single year. So over the course of a parliament, that's £10 billion. And we would put that money into our NHS and into free breakfast clubs at all primary schools. And the money for the NHS will be used to pay for a couple of things. First of all, for the 2 million additional appointments a year to reduce that backlog, and also for 700,000 additional dentist appointments, because I know, both from my own constituency and campaigning in other places as well, that there are many people. In fact, I was in Selby and Ainsty during that by-election back in the summer, and there's one woman, and it's a conversation that will really stick with me. She said, my grandchildren have never seen a dentist, and that really scares me. And that is not unique to that family. There are many people who cannot get registered with an NHS dentist. And so the commitment as well to 700,000 additional dental appointments a year.
And this is all important, but when you look at the scale of the challenges that the NHS faces, and so many other public services as well, the question that a lot of people they hear about the announcements about VAT on private schools, about the Nondom tax, although many people are worried that the Nondom tax runs a risk of having been spent quite a few times over.
Well, it's spent on these things. It's spent on the 2 million additional appointments, the 700,000 dental appointments, and the breakfast clubs.
They are really, really important individual things. But many, many economists look at this and say that is nowhere near what needs to be done. And that nobody's expecting you to announce the manifesto now, as much as we'd love to have you announce it on my radio show on Weekend Drive. But the big question that people can see from this autumn statement is that the economy is still in a really, really difficult state. If you win the election, and it's looking very likely, you're coming in with a sort of we're going to fix Britain narrative. Public services are in an absolute state. They require public spending, but you're saying we're not going to do much public spending and there's not much money. How are you going to fix Britain when there's not that much money?
Well, look, I'm certainly under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I would inherit if I have the privilege of being Chancellor next year in a Labour government. But we have a short-term plan to inject cash now into our schools and our hospitals, but then you have to grow the economy, because unless you grow the economy, you are not going to be able to improve living standards or have the money to sustainably invest in public services. And that's why Keir and I have said that the number one mission of an incoming Labour government will be to grow the economy. And we've set out a comprehensive set of plans that we've worked on with business. For example, reforming the planning system to get Britain building again, reforming our pension system, the work that we did with Lord Jim O'Neill on how to make Britain the best place to start and scale up a business and have access to that long-term patient capital that businesses need to grow, as well as the National Wealth Fund, where a Labour government would invest alongside business in the opportunities of the future for jobs, prosperity and growth in Britain. And those plans, which are backed by business, are a serious way to grow the economy, because that has been the missing ingredient in the UK economy these last 13 years. As said in my response to the autumn statement, the UK's economic performance when it comes to growth has been in the bottom third of the league table of advanced OECD economies these last 13 years. This isn't just 1 year's numbers. This is between 2010 and 2023, where we are today. And the problem is, in a low growth environment, it's impossible to both improve living standards and improve public services. And that's why we see both of them falling.
Now, you have this very ambitious growth aspiration. You want to have the highest sustained growth in the G7. You've mentioned a lot of plans there. But when you speak to economists and you speak to sort of, financial commentators, I think there's a lot of agreement with the basics of your plan. I think people think it's a good plan, particularly around planning reform. That's something which even many Conservatives have actually said is a good thing to do. But the feedback I get from people is, look, this is all very admirable, but all of this will take time. Many have also said, look, it's quite risky to tie yourself to like a specific target. It's something that Rishi Sunak, has sort of done. How are you actually going to get this growth? We get the aspiration for growth. Everybody wants growth. Whatever wing of Liz Truss wanted growth, everybody wants growth. The question is, and I was at a business dinner just a few nights ago, and the question that came up from a number of people around the table, they like the plans. How are you actually going to get growth?
Yeah. So the reforms to planning, the pension reforms, the creation of the National Wealth Fund, the modern industrial strategy, the reform of the apprenticeship levy to turn it into a growth and skills levy. And I've been Shadow Chancellor for 2.5 years now. I get teased for this smoked salmon and scrambled egg offensive, I think it's called. When I'm not having Marmite and toast, I'm with business leaders having smoked salmon and scrambled eggs. And I've used those breakfasts and lunches and dinners and one-to-one meetings that I've had over the last couple of years to really drill down into the detail of what is needed to unlock the business investment that we need in our economy. And business investment lags well behind what you see in comparable countries, which is a real problem for us if we want to seize the opportunities of the future. And just earlier this week, on Monday, I hosted the first meeting of the British Infrastructure Council, which I would chair if I become Chancellor next year. But we've set it up now because we want to make sure that from day one of a Labour government, we have those plans ready. And the Infrastructure Council, sitting on that, are major UK and global investors who all said to me on Monday, we've got money to invest, we are investing around the world, but at the moment, Britain is not as good a prospect as it has been in the past and as we think it can be. Too much bureaucracy, planning rules slow everything down, not enough clarity from government on what their mission is, too much chopping and changing from government on what their priorities are. They say that if you can sort those things out, the investment will flow to Britain. And so we're now working as part of that British Infrastructure Council to put in place what is needed to unlock that investment so that we can once again build things and do things in Britain.
But of course, all of this is going to take time.
Yes,
yeah,
and I'm not going to make an apology for that because...
I mean, this growth is not going to just happen the minute you get into Downing Street.
No, there's no...
Take sort of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years.
No, it doesn't need to take that long. But you are right. There's no lever that you can switch in Whitehall to say, we'd now like to have growth in the economy. That's why I've used this time in opposition to work up the detailed plans that we would then implement in government. And businesses say to me, whether it is investors or construction, manufacturing firms, life sciences businesses, green technology businesses, we want to invest in Britain. We've got the money to invest in Britain, but at the moment we're being held back by a government that is not clear enough about what it wants to do, the financing arrangements and all the rest of it. So I will make no apologies though for having a longer term plan, because what you've had from this government is a sort of sticking plaster approach. You see it in our public services. We're just entering winter now. There will be an emergency winter plan for the NHS, and then we'll get into the spring and the government will breathe a sigh of relief that we've got through the winter. The sticking plaster approach, whether it comes to infrastructure, the NHS, business investment, that's got to be replaced by a proper long-term plan to unlock the real prosperity and opportunity that there is in Britain.
I mean, a lot of business leaders also say to me that the skill shortages and the labour shortages are a huge issue as well. We've just had these very high net immigration figures that have just come out in the last day or two as well. Lots of business leaders say, look, we need to keep the immigration levels high because we need these skills. What's your view on that? Do you think immigration should come down?
Yes, I think immigration should come down, and we do that by training people up who are already here in Britain.
Time.
It does take time, but it is the answer to this question.
So what do businesses do in the meantime? What if that hurts growth?
Right, so of course you've got to have an immigration system that works with businesses so they can get the people in that they need. But wouldn't it be better if we know that we don't have enough engineers, we know that we don't have enough doctors, so instead of having a cap in the number of doctors that are trained, we train up young people who have got the A-levels and who want to study medicine to get into medical school to train to be doctors, rather than bringing in doctors that were trained abroad, which actually takes them out of the economies that they were trained in, but also denies opportunities for young people here who want to train.
So some people listening to this will be quite upset at what you've just said. I mean, my father was an overseas trained doctor. The NHS is really, held afloat by lots of kind of overseas doctors.
Absolutely. But there are also...
Do you worry that people will criticise you for saying that?
No, I don't think so. I think it's common sense. We've got young people who have got the grades and have got the tenacity and the desire to go to medical school, but there's been a cap on numbers. Why have we got that cap on numbers when we know we're not training up enough doctors or nurses to work in our NHS? And similarly, we know that we need more engineers in Britain. What are we doing to make sure that we've got an apprenticeship programme and a degree programme that's training people up in those areas? Of course, we're always going to want to bring in high-skilled people from abroad, but if you know you've got a skill shortage, and I've had one for years, well, why on earth aren't we adjusting our education and our training policies to ensure that we are training up enough people? And another thing with the immigration system, which Yvette Cooper has pointed to, which doesn't seem to make any sense at all, is that in skill shortage subjects, you can bring in migrant workers and pay them 20% less than the going rate in Britain. That undercuts the wages of people who are already here. And I think that rule should be changed as well. And again, it would encourage the training up of workers who are already in Britain.
Now, you've got a very good relationship with business leaders in the business community. Whenever I'm out, I do a lot of business events, and everybody speaks very highly of you. Let's talk a bit about union leaders, because when I speak to people in the trade union movement, if I'm absolutely honest, they maybe this is where the Marmite thing comes in. They're a bit less warm about you. Many union leaders are very worried that you are being so committed to fiscal discipline, which they do understand. They're really worried about what lies ahead. They're worried that your overcaution could cost the Labour Party and the country in the long run. And many union bosses have said to me, look, we'll kind of shut up to get Labour across the line. But once Rachel's in number 11 and Keir Starmer's in number 10, we're going to come to them. We're going to be really, really tough. We're going to want more money for public services, and we're going to want more money for our workers, particularly in the public sector. How are you going to navigate that relationship?
Well, I think that working people and the trade unions that represent them know that when a government plays fast and loose with the public finances, it is family finances that pay the price. That's what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the Conservatives did just a year ago when they had a load of unfunded tax cuts. But it would be the same thing if you had a load of unfunded spending commitments, that what would happen is that you'd create chaos in financial markets and interest rates would go up. And that would mean for working people higher mortgages in the same way that people are experiencing higher mortgages today because of what the Conservatives did last year. So it is pro-working people to be pro fiscal responsibility, and it is clear now that it is Labour that is the party of economic and fiscal responsibility.
Let's fast forward to, let's say you get over the line, you become chancellor. You're in your sort of first couple of months. You've got many of the union bosses coming to you saying, our people need a pay rise. We've stuck by you. It's time for you to pay us back. What are you going to say to them?
We've got to grow the economy. And it is through growing the economy that we have money for the things that a Labour government would want to do, including investing in public services. And I think that, I know that trade union leaders know that, because that's what happened when Labour was last in office. Public sector workers had pay rises, the public services were better funded. People's experience, particularly of our NHS, was a lot better than it is today. And I think actually I've got very good relationships. I've been in touch just this week with the leader of the GMB union. I met with the leader of the TUC, Paul Novak, last week. So I think I've got strong relations, but I don't think anybody, whether it's a business leader or a trade union leader, thinks that I'm a soft touch. They know that I'm committed to the fiscal discipline that I talk about.
Your fiscal discipline message is very clear. So your message to people listening who might be working in the health sector or teachers who think that a Labour chancellor means that they're just going to get a pay rise, that's not on the cards.
Well, of course I want public sector workers to be properly rewarded, but I'm not going to make any commitment to spend money without saying exactly where that money is going to come from. But I think people who work in our schools and our hospitals know what happened when Labour was last in office, and that's that the public services that they worked in were better resourced and better funded than they are today.
They also realise that circumstances have changed. We're in a very, very different climate now than we were in 1997. Even Ken Clarke said, look, Labour inherited a really good growing economy. He was actually quite surprised that Labour agreed to stick to his spending plans, because he was like, actually, the economy was in a much better position. If you win, you will inherit a
it's absolutely true. When Labour won in 1997, public services were on their knees. but the economy was growing. And that is very different to what we've got today.
So Labour could put money in, you're not going to be in that situation.
Well, that's why the plans to grow the economy are so important.
You've just
to us,
said
because
that you're basically saying, and you're being honest with people, you're saying that might take a while. So your message to people is, look, hold your nose, just stick with us, good times are coming ahead.
Well, I'd say a couple of
patience.
I'd say a couple of things. First of all, we've got the immediate injection of cash into our schools and our hospitals through closing the loopholes, incling the Nondom tax.
That is quite small in the grand scheme of things.
On the non-doms alone, it's £2 billion a year. On the getting rid of the tax loopholes, whereby private schools don't pay VAT or business rates, that's about £1.3 billion a year. So this is significant sums of money that are not in our schools and our hospitals today that would be under a Labour government. So we know that there is an immediate injection of cash that is needed, and then a serious plan to grow the economy, not a Liz Truss sort of sugar rush, not what we had from Jeremy Hunt this week, which I'm afraid is too little too late after 13 years.
All of that will take time. So is your message to people listening?
Well, my message is...
vote us in, but then you'll just have to wait a while. No, just hang in there.
No, my message is there will be an immediate injection of cash through closing the tax loopholes, and then we've worked in opposition to develop a credible, a serious, comprehensive plan for growth that we will get on and deliver, which will mean our economy will grow in a way we haven't experienced these last 13 years, which will free up resources to invest in our public services, as well as keeping taxes down, which is also really important for nurses, for teachers, for police officers who work in the public sector, who are seeing more and more of their money taken up in higher taxes, higher mortgages and higher prices after 13 years of Conservative government.
So when it comes to taxes, you've been very clear that you don't really want to see the tax burden rise on working people. I mean, I know, again, you can't, write the manifesto now, but for many of my listeners, are their taxes going to rise under a Rachel Reeves Treasury?
No, I want taxes on working people to be lower. The tax burden, as I said before, going into this autumn statement was equivalent to a 10p increase in national insurance, because particularly the freezing of the tax thresholds, the threshold at which you start paying tax, and then the threshold at which you start paying the 40p higher rate of tax. And that was only partially reversed this week when people were given 2p back. But for every 10p that's been taken away, only 2p back. So it's not just robbing Peter to pay Paul, it's robbing Peter to pay Peter. You've taken 10p off, and now you're giving 2p back. And the British people aren't fools. They know that that is still a tax
And is that something
increase.
that you would look at? Would you look at readjusting those tax thresholds?
My instincts are to have lower taxes on working people. I'm not going to make uncosted promises, because that is the way to economic ruin, and something that the Conservatives have indulged in far too often these last few years. But my instincts is to do what I can to keep taxes lower for working people.
Ken Clarke, I was listening to something he said recently, and he said, look, the art of being a skilled chancellor is to sort of pickpocket the public without them noticing. Well, in terms of
this government have been good at pickpocketing, but unfortunately the public have sat up and noticed that they've got less money in their pockets. So honestly, Aisha, the way to bring in tax revenue and the way to make people better off is to grow the economy. And so I'm not sitting in my office thinking of clever ways to tax people more. I'm thinking of clever ways in which we can unlock the business investment and the potential of our country through the changes, the planning changes, the apprenticeship changes, the pensions changes, the National Wealth Fund. All of those things that I know can help unlock investment and prosperity in Britain.
You make a very, very powerful argument about working people and the tax burden. But what about a wealth tax? Because, you talked about the TUC, you get on very well with Paul Novak, who's the new General Secretary there. He's called for a wealth tax. There are also very wealthy people who have said we should be taxed more. Why are you so against a wealth tax? Because it makes sense to a lot of people.
Because my focus is on economic growth. In the end, unless you get growth, you're going to end up keep putting up taxes. And that's not the sort of chancellor I want to be. I want to be the sort of chancellor that generates the growth and prosperity and gets us out of this doom loop of high taxes and low growth that we've been stuck in for 13 years. And that is where my priority is going to be.
Now, you're very much sending the signal that you are going to be this Iron Chancellor. Very, very tough fiscal discipline. Lots of your shadow cabinet members dare not at all, even in private conversations, lean into any more spending because they're like, we have to clear that with Rachel Reeves.
That's what I like to hear.
They're all. Do you quite like the fact that they're quite terrified of you? Do you like that?
Well, I like the fact they're not going around making unfunded spending commitments and that message has got across.
Okay. But what a lot of people also say to me is what they're worried about is, yes, the fiscal discipline is really, really important, but hope is really important as well when it comes to winning an election. And this will be an incredibly important moment in political history if Labour does come back from opposition. But it's hard to create excitement when there isn't that promise of lots of money and lots of change. And lots of people are already saying, my big worry about Labour coming in is I'm going to be really, really pleased to see the back of the Tories, but I'm already feeling disappointed about what Labour is going to do for the country. How do you feel about that impending sense of disappointment that many people are going to feel?
That's not, I mean, when I'm out, campaigning, speaking at Labour Party events and rallies and everything around the country, I don't think people are getting their disappointment in
You're speaking at rallies, you're speaking to people who want to be, part of the Labour faithful. What about people like the taxi driver I spoke to the other day, who literally was practically in tears telling me about what a difficult time he's facing. And he said, look, I want a change of government, but I don't feel like a Labour government can help me that much when they come in.
Well, I expect that the reason why, your taxi driver and many other working people are very concerned at the moment is that they're paying more on their gas and electricity bills. And of course, the news just earlier this week that bills are going to go up again in January. Everyone looks forward to Christmas, but there's a sense of trepidation about the cost of Christmas and being able to afford the Christmas that your family wants. The mortgages, 1.5 million people have remortgaged this year as they've come off fixed rate mortgage deals. On average, they're paying £220 a month more a month. I mean, most people don't have that sort of money. And so I want to give people hope, but I also want people to know that they will have security with a Labour government. And there is no hope, I don't think, without security. And so if I sort of said, don't worry, you're going to have a pay rise. Don't worry, I'm going to put a load of money into the schools and the hospitals that I know need it. Don't worry, I'm going to, cap the costs of the essentials, etc., etc., etc. People would just go, sounds great, but it's just not possible. And that's no hope at all. So we've got to have things that add up. I started my career as an economist at the Bank of England. I know how important it is to have low and stable inflation and predictable interest rates. People haven't had that these last few years. So yes, we've got to give people hope. And I think our plans for the National Health Service, the plans for our National Wealth Fund to create good jobs in all parts of Britain, the promise to bring back some decency and standards in politics again after what we've seen these last few years, I think that does inspire and give hope that things can be better after the chaos that we've seen these last 13 years under the Conservatives.
Look, a lot of people listening to that are going to feel, they're going to hear what you say, but they are going to feel a bit of disappointment. Look, you may be quite unpopular when you come in, when you have to say to people, look, I can't give you everything you want. You might have to say that to people you're very close to in the Labour movement. You may have to say it to many in the voluntary sector, the charity sector. How prepared are you to be a tough chancellor, but potentially be quite an unpopular chancellor, particularly at that beginning period when you say there may well be this lag between you coming into office and growth happening and the economy turning round? You may be quite unpopular. You might become a bit of a hate figure for some on the left. How do you feel about that?
Well, I've said that the fiscal rules that I've outlined are non-negotiable, and I'm not going to change that because fiscal discipline is essential for the prosperity and security of ordinary working families. And I just won't play fast and loose with the public finances. It would be dangerous, and in the end, it wouldn't be better off people that would pay the price. It would be ordinary working people who have not got £220 a month lying around to pay higher mortgage costs that the Tories have inflicted upon people. But I would also say I recognise that public services are in a mess, and that's why we have committed to an immediate injection of cash in the first Labour budget into our schools and our hospitals. And then, I've done the work in opposition to make sure we've got a proper plan for growth. It's not going to be able to be turned around overnight, but if we can unlock the business investment that businesses say they want to and they have to invest in Britain, but they need a government that matches the ambition that they have, I think that we can turn things around and bring prosperity back to our country.
Now, there's some people who hope that this talk of fiscal discipline is talk to win the election. And there's many people who hope that when you get into number 11, suddenly you'll be like, dunno, actually, now that we're in, we are going to borrow more money. You're being really clear about that. That's not your plan.
Yes, and actually,
This is not an act.
I don't think people would want that, because what happens when you make unfunded commitments, what happens, and we've had a real life experiment from the Conservatives just last year in it, is you get chaos in financial markets, people's pensions are put in peril, and you see a spike in mortgage rates, which makes people worse off. And so I'm sticking to these fiscal rules, not because I think it is politically expedient to do so, but because it is the right thing, and it's the right thing by ordinary working people and the right thing by public services as well.
Well, I've just got a couple more questions. I know we're running out of time. Now, what's really interesting about your position now, you have become an incredibly powerful figure in British politics. And as I said, the business community really, really look up to you. But there's another group of people who really look up to you and admire you. And that's sort of former Conservative chancellors. George Osborne is a great fan of yours. Ken Clarke is a great admirer of yours. Nadine Dorris this week said that she thought you'd make a great chancellor. How do you feel about that? Is that a bit of a kiss of death for you, or how do you feel about that?
Well, Labour's only going to win the election if we attract people who formerly voted Conservative. And so, I want, and Labour needs to build that broad coalition of people. And
Do you mind being called a right-winger, or does it not bother you?
Well, I know what I am. I'm Labour, and I always have been since I joined the Labour Party when I was at sixth form, because my school was falling down after, well, at that stage, 16, 17 years of Conservative government. So I don't need people to tell me what my politics are. I know what my politics are. I know what my values are. But I also know that if we just get people who have always voted Labour to vote Labour, we'll have the same election result we've had the last 4 elections, and that is losing. And I didn't come into politics to keep losing. I've been an MP for 13 and a half years now. All of those years have been spent in opposition, and I haven't been able to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve in going into politics. And even at a local level in my constituency of Leeds West, there's so much need, and there are so many public services that are crumbling. But as a constituency MP, I can only achieve so much because we're in opposition. And so if we can attract people who have voted Conservative in the past to vote Labour, there's a chance that we can do what we came into politics to do, and that's to change Britain.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is that you make the point that if you become chancellor, you'll be the first female chancellor this country's ever had in sort of 800 years of there being a treasury. Now, there has been some rumour that Rishi Sunak could reshuffle Jeremy Hunt ahead of the next general election. Claire Coutinho is a name that's mentioned. How would you feel if that did happen? Would you be slightly gutted, or would you think, put that aside, it is good to have a woman in the Treasury?
I've written a book about how we need more women in economics, and so if the Conservatives get there first, then I'm totally fine with that. But I would also say, in the 13 and a half years now that the Conservatives have been in office, we've had 7 chancellors of the Exchequer. this is not normal. And if they make it 8, I think it shows the chaos at the heart of the Conservatives after 13 years, and it's just one more reason to kick them out and give Labour a try.
Now, I was at your book launch, the Women Who Made Modern Economics, which is, a fascinating sort of spotlight on lots of hidden figures in economics. Now, you did get into a bit of trouble over some accusations of plagiarism and cutting and pasting. What happened there?
Well, look, I mean, when those those problems came to light, I put my hands up and said, look, I should have been more careful with the editing, with the referencing in the book, and I've committed to putting that right.
And we know you're a chess fan, famously a chess fan. We know that the Queen's Gambit is coming back for us. Did you watch?
I didn't know that was coming back, is it?
Coming back for a second season.
I heard it here first on Times Radio.
Did you watch the Queen's Gambit?
Absolutely, I did.
You're going to watch the second series?
I will do. I would say, though, that when I was playing chess as a girl and as a teenager, it wasn't quite as glamorous as what you see in the Queen's Gambit, but I very much look forward to the next series.
And if you do get to number 11, you're going to have a nice chessboard there.
Absolutely. I will bring my chessboard from home to number 11, I guess. But yes, I actually played chess earlier this week with the man who first taught me to play when I was 7 years old at primary school in South East London. And I hadn't seen him since 1989, and he came to the House of Commons this week for a tour. He's now retired as a head teacher, but he came in, I saw him, had lunch with him, and then challenged him to a game of chess.
And who won?
I won, Aisha. I beat my chess teacher at chess. I know that everyone thinks that the big thing this week has been the autumn statement. It has not been. I beat Mr. Hawkins at chess.
Brilliant. Well, look, Rachel, I know how busy you are. We're really grateful for being so generous with your time. Thank you for speaking with Times Radio.
Thank you.